All right, I had to cut that last taping a bit short. Someone came to the door. And what I said I was going to do in this one is I'm going to just set this originally to flex. They do not do that. They do not do that. Okay, so there we go. That's what we've got. So you can already take a look at it. There's the difference between setting it to flex and taking it again and setting it from display flex to display grid. Big difference there. All right. By default, these display, as it says, in the normal flow, and then we put in the display grid. Unlike Flexbox, the items will not immediately look different. Declaring display grid gives you a one-column grid, so your items continue to display. So in other words, even if I took this out, so even if I took what was here and I commented out the container display grid, like that, saved, came back to here, and refreshed, it right now does not look any different. All right. But we will need it in there for what we're about to do. All right, to see something that looks more grid-like, we need to add some columns to the grid. Let's add 3 200-pixel columns. It says you can use any length, unit, or percentages to create these. So let's put this in here and see if we get this. So again, what I like to call immediate feedback, and that's what you get. It changes from this to that. All right, so we've got 3 200-pixel columns, and of course we had one left, and that's why it went onto a line all by itself. In addition to creating grids using lengths and percentages, you can use FR, the FR unit. As it says, it represents 1 fraction of the available space. So what this should do, all right, I believe at least, it's going to look very similar to what we already have, because that would be 1/3, 1/3, and 1/3. Let's see. All right, they got wider, but it's still set up the same way. And they got wider because previously we had set a 200-pixel limit on here, and now there is no limit. So it's basically taking up what it can take up, right? All right. It says if you change your definition like so I should only have to change this line here, just this one. So this was 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. If I'm correct here, this should be 2/4, 1/4, 1/4, if it can all fit in there. So that would be half, quarter, and a quarter. So there's double, half, there's 1/4, and there's 1/4. Still set up the same way, but you can see because we still set it up as a 3-column format, I believe. The track now gets 2 FR for the available space. For the other 2 tracks, get 1 FR. It says you can mix FR and fixed length. Okay, so there's a lot of different things that you can do between these. You can also come in and set the gap between them. So notice here is a 20-pixel gap. So I think that's the exact same thing we currently have, except now it will be gapped. And you can now see the gap, the 20 pixel gap between each one. Okay, all right. Again, the gaps can be of any length or unit or percentage, but not an FR unit for the gaps. The gap properties must be prefixed by grid dash, but this has been changed in the spec as the intention is to make them usable in multiple layout formats. The prefix versions will be maintained as an alias, so it'll be safe for some time. To be on the safe side, you could double up and add them both. That's what they're showing here. Let's just see if we remove the grid gap and just make it gap, if it still works exactly. Oh, we do have just gap in there. But I think if we put in grid then, grid dash gap, I think it'll again look exactly the same. And it does. All right. You can repeat all or a section of your track listing using the repeat notation. So it says repeat this, so you'll have 3, each with 1, with the 20 gap between. So in other words, it shouldn't look any different if this works the way I believe it'll work. So there's a lot of different ways of basically, for lack of better words, showing the same thing. So let's go in here and refresh, and I don't think it's going to look any different. Okay. I guess that we lost this a little bit of the sizing in here. All right. All right, been a very different kind of day here at home, in that I've been getting phone calls, the doorbell rang, etc. But I'm back, and hopefully, okay. Let's talk about the implicit and explicit grid. As it said, we've only specified column tracks so far. This is an example of an explicit versus an implicit grid. The explicit grid is one that you create using grid-template-columns or grid-template column rows. There is also an implicit grid, as it said, that's created when content is placed outside of that grid. By default, tracks created in an implicit grid are auto-sized, which in general means they're large enough to fit their content. If you wish to give implicit grid tracks a size, you can use the grid auto rows and the grid auto columns. And here's an example of that. All right. And that's how ours looked. All right. Okay. The MinMax function. Our 100 pixel tall tracks won't be very useful if we add content whose tracks is taller than the 100 pixels, because as it says, it would cause overflow. It might be better to have tracks that are a minimum of 100 pixels tall and can still expand as we add more and more material into them. All right. So as it says there, the MinMax function sets a minimum and a maximum size for a track. All right. The minimum size down below here is 100 pixels, but the maximum is auto, which means it should always attempt to expand to fill the content. Now it doesn't look any different, but we don't have really content in there other than the words that you see. So let's try to change one of those. I'll just grab 5, it's just arbitrarily. So where we've got 5, let's put that in there. All right, we'll add it one more time. And let's see what happens after we do that. All right, hopefully you notice that everything that was in that row then expanded. Okay. And if we knock it back down again to where it was to begin with, save, come back again, you'll see that these will all now change so they're the same width, the same height, I should say, as the ones up here. And indeed, that's what happens. As many columns as will fit. It says we can combine some of the things we've talked about so far to create a useful pattern. Sometimes it is helpful to be able to ask Grid to create as many columns as will fit into the container. We do this by setting the grid template columns using the repeat notation. But rather than passing in a number, we pass in the word autofill. For the second parameter, we can again use the MinMax. With a minimum value equal to the track size, we would like it to have, and the maximum being 1 fractional unit. All right. So is this going to look any different? No. So I guess the bottom line is that as we've talked about with other things in here, is it is quite possible for you to use the same, to create the same looking kind of format, all right, in different ways. All righty. Line-based placement. It says we now move on from creating a grid to placing things on the grid. The grid always has lines, which lines start at 1 and relate to the writing mode of the document. In English, column 1 is on the left-hand side and row 1 is at the top, etc. We can place things according to these lines by specifying a start and an end line using the properties that are shown there. And again, you probably have already realized this, but these are all hyperlinked, so you can go and find out more information. All right. These properties can have a line number as the value. You can also use shorthand properties with these. All right, so it says download this file as a starting point or see it live here. So I'm going to come back to here. This will become my new download file. Let's take a quick look at it and see what it currently looks like. So it looks like this. A little different. All right. Now it says it has a grid defined already and a simple article outline. You can see that the auto placement is placing items 1 into each cell of the grid that we have created. All right, we will instead place all of the elements for our site on the grid using grid lines by using the following CSS. So let's take a look at that. Again, I'm not even going to push this over. I'm just going to leave it where it is. And you can see there's a lot more rhyme and reason to it right now. In other words, this could very well end up being where we would put our navigation area, maybe our header nav area, our footer area, our content area, and maybe an aside. Just as an example there. Note, you can also use the value -1 to target the end column or row line and count inwards using negative values. All right, just about through here. Positioning with grid template areas. Is that the last one? No. And even though I'm at 16, I think I might even run over a little. I'm just going to finish this because the first one that I created, the doorbell rang. I cut that out, but it was only 6 minutes long. So an alternative way to place items on your grid is to use grid template areas. Give the various elements the design name. It says remove the line-based positioning from the last example or re-download it and add the following CSS. So let's grab this. Let's go into here and remove all the last stuff that we put in, which I think well, let's go back and re-download it. All right, so that's what we had to begin with. So we left off on the aside, and they want us to come in here then and instead, as it says, place all the elements for our site on the grid using the grid lines. Now, when you look here, it looks like it should look exactly the same. Oh, I'm sorry. We're in here. An alternative way is the grid template areas. That's what we're saying. Remove the line positioning. So let's grab all this, reload it, and again, let's see if it looks exactly the same as it did. So we come in here, we add this, save. A moment of truth as we refresh, and it looks the same as it did. So again, as already mentioned, more than one way of doing the same thing. So the rules here for grid template areas, you need to have every cell on the grid filled. To span across 2 cells, repeat the name. To leave a cell empty, use a period. Areas must be rectangular. And areas can't be repeated in different locations. Yeah, and this is how you learn, as you play around with it. Okay, all right. Grid frameworks. Now, this is almost a tie-in to the use of Bootstrap, because Bootstrap is a framework, and Bootstrap is based on a 12-column format. But as it says here, grid frameworks tend to be based around a 12 or 16-column grids and with CSS grids, you don't need a third-party tool. It's already there. So download the starting point file. Like I said, this one's going to run a little longer, but we're almost through here. So we've got this. Doesn't look very good right now. Then we want to come in and add the following CSS, and lo and behold, it should look just the same. All right, it should look just the same as it did previously. So we're checking that out right now. And there you go. So as we mentioned, there's multiple ways of doing the same thing. Okay, I'll just leave it right there. If you use the Flexbox Grid Inspector to overlay, you can see how the 12-column grid works. All right, that's it for here. Again, I would strongly recommend that you do the test your skills and you'd look at the See Also. So now we've come in here and we've gone through the first 1, 2, 3, 4. It looks like at least the first 4 of these. Well, 5 if you include the introduction. All right. So next should be the use of floats. And again, floats are kind of like tables in that they're not as popular as they used to be. They're still around. They're still being used. And especially even for legacy, it's important to go over these. So we'll come back and look at that in just a couple.